Kuldeep, I'd like to pass it on to you. You run an organization for the last 10 years, and I think in India it's been one of the outstanding organizations we can truly call tech NGOs, the cool term. I'd love to hear what it has been like for you on that tech journey, and where did open source come into play for you, and sort of what happened then?
Yeah, first time in 10 years we've been called cool, so that's a start. Uh, so our so just to take back, go back in time, when we started off, and the first 5 6 years we didn't have anything to do with tech, and that was not even our intention to get into this business of tech. It was sometime in 2015, 2016, when the community of citizens and young people we were working with was growing. The whole tech bug bit us. And I was just thinking, like when Kailash and Donald spoke about their first open source contribution, I realized that like our first open source contribution was like a design and implementation of a waterless urinal. And just handing over that design and getting the community to build on it. So I think by 2015, 2016, like we already had a mindset of wanting to build things and hand it over and build it with the community. But in 2015, 2016, I think we made our first big mistake with tech was we started copying the for-profit tech world, and we got into this app first mentality. So we decided that we'll build this amazing app and citizens will come together and will solve local issues. And like in my mind, I was like unicorn double squared, right? Like this is it, we are there. But while we started, we built the tool and we took it to the ground. Of course, we realized the tech play and on the ground play is like it humbles you in more ways than one, right? That was the first thing. The second thing was that we could not find any levers in the not-for-profit ecosystem wherein we can, we could just take that technology and build on it. It always felt like, we had to start building from scratch. We had to, and back then, like words like DPG, DPI, they were not like being used like so generously. So we did look for a few open source tools, but when we tried to take them, then we needed the people who build those open source tools to help us to actually make that open source tool repurposable. So it became very complicated for us. And by 2016-17, we felt that what we are building is a difficult thing. There's massive dependency on us. And somewhere deep down, we are not doing justice to the stakeholder we were servicing, because then it became about the ego of making this app run in more ways than one. And I think the first thing for us was like when Glific came out into the ecosystem. And then we realized, okay, here is an opportunity to take existing tools in the ecosystem. They might not sound very cool or they might not sound very tech heavy, and put them together. And that kind of actually unlocked us and it took our work to the next level. So the first challenge was, will these low-code, no-code tools work? Yes, they do work. Then the challenge was, okay, will people adopt it? Yes, that also happened. Then the challenge thrown was, is engagement happening? Yes, that is also happening. So I think in the last 2-3 years, post-COVID, we got that conviction that, simple technology is supposed to be simple. Technology is supposed to help civil society to unlock stuff. And I think this world of no-code, low-code, open source is something we resonated with in action and in thought, but it also helped us accelerate our mission. So I guess that's how we became cool.
On the journey.
On the journey, yeah.
So I'd like to touch on a couple of things from what Kuldeep mentioned. I think the first one, which was fascinating, is that he started to talk about a waterless urinal in this cool tech conference, right? And I'd like to sort of bring it back to some of you and say, what is that? What does it have to do with open source, and why was that important? So it sounds like open source is not just technology, but really a particular kind of culture or way of thinking almost. I'd like to hear from each one of you on this.
Yeah, so I see everybody looking at me, so. so, so when I mentioned that, this model is basically collaboration, community, and the shared ownership of knowledge. there are many times when you don't want to keep knowledge proprietary, and the waterless urinal design is a good example. Uh, where why it really worked so fast in the world of software is because code is something that's very easy to share, very easy to modify, very easy to collaborate around. But this is basically open source hardware in a sense, so that's a slightly harder area to collaborate on, but it's not impossible. And you see, for example, deep sea robots, for example, there are people who have created that and made the designs open source. Designs for, let's say, prosthetic foots, etc., etc. So I think the model of collaborative innovation works extremely well in software, but there's other areas like, for example, the dictionary that Kailash mentioned. Wikipedia is another great example of the world of that model of collaboration, community, and shared ownership of knowledge in the world of knowledge, content. Uh, so yeah, I think summary is that it's very easy to do this in the world of, let's say, dictionaries, software. A little bit harder to do in the world of open source hardware, but it's not impossible.
Thank you, Venki. Lobo, I'd like you to speak about Glific specifically because I've seen it in action, what those collaborative communities and shared ownership really look like. And your organization did brilliant work in curating that. So maybe you could share a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I'm kind of a bit annoyed at Glific because at Kuldeep because he kind of didn't pass on the cool word to Glific. He called Glific he called Glific boring, and he and I thought Glific was cool. So,
Boring Glific made Kuldeep cool. That's interesting.
but that's okay. We'll have a conversation after this. Um, um, so. But I'll kind of push back a bit against what Venki said, right? I mean, agreed, I think you can do open source with software, but to me, the most exciting part of working with NGOs, and this is especially for most people who come from outside the social sector, will always talk about like, hey, NGOs aren't collaborative at all, they don't talk to each other, they don't work with each other, etc. But from my perspective and being in the sector for like 20 plus years, it's so easy to work with NGOs and get them to share ideas. So I think the underlying thread of open source is basically, are you willing to share your knowledge, your ideas, your thoughts, and your experiences with your peer group? And that's where I think the sector has done an amazingly excellent job. Like in the past 5 or 10 or whatever number of years, I can think of only one example where someone has refused to share their stuff, right? And this is talking to like maybe 1,000 or 10,000 organizations. So the percentage is negligible. And that could never ever happen in the corporate world or in Silicon Valley, etc. So what Glific does, and I think from a community building perspective / open source perspective, we do things in two ways, right? Every quarter we bring together people at a fairly nice location, feed them, and they are really happy that they get a nice vacation out there. But from our perspective, we get an incredible amount of user knowledge, user research. We get to talk to them, like we basically make them work 12 to 14 hours a day, right? Because like right from the morning walks at 6 a.m. till the Exploding Kittens card game, which I don't participate in because it goes all the way till 12 a.m. or so, right? We are engaged with them, and there are quite a few people out here, like Mangal from KEF or Shweta, who've gone through the experience with us, including Reap Benefit, right? But more importantly, if you look at the Glific blogs or Tech for Dev blogs, right, half the entries come from nonprofits sharing their ideas, sharing their experiences. And that's where partners like Glific or Saturday Art Class or Key Education Foundation, like the insights that they put out there for the general NGO sector is amazing. It gives us the power, it gives us the collaboration, it gives us the community, and everyone can build on top of each other's work rather than doing it from scratch. So to a large extent, some of the principles that Kailash mentioned is being shown in action with Glific, and that's primarily due to the strength of the social sector and the strong community and collaboration there.
Thank you, Lobo. Kuldeep, would you like to?
Yeah, I think just taking two steps back, I think the point I was trying to make was that be it hardware, be it technology, I think one is it's a thought. Like you can't it's almost impossible, at least through our experience, that you can't build an open source tool if you're not open source in your thinking and you're not open source in your organization. And there are multiple facets to it. One is definitely, sharing knowledge. But I think in this sector, sharing knowledge is just not good enough, right? Like, how do you share knowledge and then also, be a running mate with some of these organizations in kind of, deploying stuff? And I agree with Lobo. I think, especially in the last 3-4 years, there is more collaboration happening, not only in terms of just sharing knowledge, because sometimes knowledge can be very linear, that's one, and knowledge is also very contextual. And what then happens is it becomes my understanding of my situation is better than your understanding of your situation. But I think one additional step in building this community of open source is also doing and tinkering with other organizations, because one not-for-profit also can understand the context you're working in, right? So if I'm a not-for-profit working in education, yes, while getting more young people to come onto my tool is one part of the work, but then the other part of the work is how do I get engagement up? And I think their not-for-profits are able to help each other. So I feel open source is just not in building a tool, putting it up on GitHub, saying here is the code, and then take the code and deploy it. Yes, that's one important hygiene factor which is needed. But I think it's also being a running mate. And I can give one specific example. Like early days when we collaborated with Glific, we had a use case. And it was a unique use case wherein we reached out to Lobo and we said, hey, on our bot, we have a lot of people giving us crowdsourced data on climate and civic issues. But the problem is the bot is one-to-one. They are not able to see it on some form of a dashboard, which is hyperlocal in nature. And Lobo immediately said, I'm willing to help you people in create this use case wherein anybody on the bot can report a location and it goes to the map. But the only requirement Lobo had, and like we didn't even discuss, Lobo said that, A, this should be usable by other not-for-profits. And we said, yeah, we have no problem with that. And the second thing, like, because of Lobo's nudge and push and in spirit of open source thinking, like we have had multiple conversations with not-for-profits, not only in India, but abroad, saying that, you can use this use case, be it in healthcare, be it in agriculture, be it in education. So I guess there are two parts to it. One part is the thinking and the second part is doing. And I think both are equally important, or else we might have a lot of open source contributions and that like it look good on paper, but I think the doing of it is very important, and Glific has probably helped in the doing part of it as well, and therefore the ecosystem has expanded.
So I'll just add a few things here, right? Means with regard to that, the project that Kuldeep mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, we put it in the first FOSS United grant proposal, which was funded by the community, right? So it basically completes the circle there. But I also want to take a step back, especially for the NGOs in the room, right? Like, I think open source is great. Open source has got lots of value, etc. But ultimately, we need to realize it's just a technology, like any other technologies, right? You've got to be clear on what problem you're solving. And open source may or may not solve the problem. But make sure you understand what the problem is before you jump into technology.
Yeah, and I'd like to also, some skeptics told me that, it's hard enough to design tech for yourself. So when you, Kuldeep, say, oh, imagine others using it and think about how they might use it, would you say that's much harder to do, right? You already are struggling running your own organization, you know what you want, and then think about, okay, how might other 10 organizations work? It sounds like a unsurmountable task in some way.
No, that's when you think you're at the center of the universe. Right? No, I'm like, what I'm trying to say is, obviously, when we are building a tool, we are not, if the thinking is, oh, we'll build a tool, it'll become open source and hundreds of organizations will use it. I don't think it's open source in spirit. I think the spirit of open source is, I will try to build something which caters to our need, but I'll try to build it in such a way that others can also use it. Now, I don't know how others will use it, but so there should be some openness and flexibility in the design of it. But I think the true value to that would be when others are excited enough to share what they have learned from that, or they're willing to contribute in that. So I don't want to give this impression that like we were sitting in our office in Jayanagar, Gautam and me, and we were thinking, okay, we'll build this open source tool and everybody will use it. It does not happen like that in reality, right? But the intention was that let's build it in such a way that there are pieces, if broken, can help someone else. And we knew like geolocation, leaderboard, volunteer management. We had enough understanding of the ecosystem. So my urge to not-for-profits is like when you go back to office today, like don't think, okay, now let's build an open source tool and like, that will be damn cool. No, I don't think that's not how we approached it, or that's our learning. But meeting people from FOSS, we realized, Okay, there's a thinking you can have wherein it is like it is modular enough for people, like a Lego block, right? People can take pieces of this Lego block. That is one part of it. And second, for us, the biggest success would be if others have used it. That's one part. But others feel the need to contribute it, because that's an ultimate indication of value creation. Not everybody will be able to add value, but at least if some people add value. So we have added value to the community of Glific, and therefore, like, Glific feels like a part of our ecosystem as well. So I think value creation is also very, very important, and both are important.
I'd say there are three layers to open source. One is you consume open source. The other is you contribute back to open source, and that may be in terms of documentation, identifying bugs, etc., or adding features, which is what you did with Glific. And the third is where you create your own open source projects. And when you create your own open source projects, you have to realize that it's not a one-way street. Just you build something, you just throw it over the wall, and you expect people to contribute back to it. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. An example of how a good example of how that happened is a company called Hopscotch, which created a platform for APIs, and they open sourced it, and they saw that there's a lot of interest from people around the world in using that platform. In a sense, that's validation that you're solving the right problems. If people are not contributing back to your open source project, you have to start thinking about, am I working on the right problem set or not?
So just a couple of comments there, right? And this is especially for most NGOs in the room. I can guarantee you, and I'm more than happy to talk to you later on in this conference, that 99% of your needs are already exist out there already, right? Most NGOs in this room should not be thinking of even building an open source, building a project, or contributing to a project. You should contribute to a project, but not necessarily build a project from the ground up. What Kuldeep said was there are lots of Lego blocks, right? I think a lot of the things that we can do is take those Lego blocks and stitch them together and build on the top of the Lego blocks. We don't need to create a whole new universe of Lego blocks to begin with. And the other thing is, whether we like it or not, like if you look at GitHub, 99% of the projects out there don't have any other contributor besides the contributor themselves, right? So most open source projects don't go anywhere. And so if you want your project to go anywhere, building the community and getting your collaborators in at the very beginning as you're thinking of the idea is super important. With Glific, we did that with a bunch of NGOs to begin with. With Dalgo, which we just released September 1, we again did that with a bunch of NGOs, because these NGOs are our inspiration. Then basically they are the source of all our ideas.
So it's almost like co-creation from the beginning in some way, of course.
Yeah, for me means that has to be, right? You cannot means, I don't agree with like what Kuldeep said, like we'll build it and we'll try to generalize it. It works in some cases, but most of the times if you want someone else to use it, you've got to make them an equal partner in the room from the very, very beginning. Because later on, like, and I have this conversation with many NGOs who will have this feeling like, hey, we've got this amazingly cool tool. We want everyone else to use it. But you've built it for your very specific needs. And while you're really cool and special and unique, no one really gives a damn about that. Yeah, from a technology perspective, not from the work that you're doing. Just a clarification.
Talking about you, Kuldeep.
You're talking about us? No, I actually disagree with Lobo, because I think the way he's looking at this is completely from a tech perspective, right? But when tech perspective taken onto the ground with other not-for-profits in their context, it makes a lot of sense. And I'll give you an example. When Kailash showed us this leaderboard, Gautam and I, we saw this leaderboard and we went back to office supremely excited. We said, okay, it's already done. We don't have to, break our head. But we faced a lot of resistance from our team. What is this design? It is so simple. Why are we copying what Robin Hood Army is doing? And things like that. And that again goes back to the thought process of open source thinking, right? And now, was that Lego block usable for us? Yes, it was. And I can give it in writing that just the leaderboard idea, while it might sound very simple, trivial, basic, it has multiple applications, right? So community building here is a twofold thing. If you have built a tool and you expect others to contribute because you see them as skilled labor, that is not community building. That is a transaction for which you're asking somebody to contribute, right? And then you'll give some incentive like t-shirt, bottle, or feed them well, right? But I think the flip of it is when you go to other civil society organizations and you say, hey, here is this tool. We see this use case. We think if you feel there's a use case come on board, I think there is a lot of openness. So the tool, I think the presentation of the tool is very, very important, right? The presentation of the tool is, here are these Lego blocks, see if something is working for you. And I think there are a lot of use cases. And I'll actually stick my neck out and say that most not-for-profits are in a great position to enable the tech ecosystem because they understand use cases at a very, very granular level. They understand that if I have been a grassroots worker, I want to replicate the same experience which is on the ground on technology. And that's not possible. So only one on the ground organization, A, can understand that pain, can understand the pain of a teacher and say, listen, what the magic you create in class will not happen on a chatbot, right? And then show them use cases which have worked for us, which I don't think technologists can understand. So technologists will have a blanket statement and there'll be some philosophical point of view. Technology is about letting go of control. But I can't let go of control because I'm in service of my stakeholder, right? I want my stakeholder to have the same experience. And therefore, I feel that you can build a generic template, but respect where the stakeholder is and have openness to change it, but not tell them that this is the only way to operate. So I think that's the slight agreement/disagreement.
Don't feel compelled to answer, Donald. You can.
I'm more than happy to answer.
Take it outside.
Yeah, we'll take it. There'll be a death match going on outside.
I mean, in all intents and purposes, both Samaja and Project Text for Dev, Dalgo and Glific are available in our spaces and next to each other, so you can see for yourselves what's happening there. A question for me, I also heard from some of the tech company funders that apparently techies really love to work for open source projects. That apparently, and actually this founder told me, I find it very painful. It's very long. It takes much longer than just take something proprietary and just get the job done. But the techies get excited, and it's easier to hire techies if you do open source. So those of us who are in citizen sector know how painfully difficult it is to find tech talent and retain them. So is there some answer in open source as well in terms of attracting all these great techies who are sure now in the room and also listening?
I'll actually take that. So I have found it very difficult to work with technologists. I think they're very obsessed with their choice of technology. There is deep attachment. We have worked with from 2015 to 2017, we must have worked with 12 technologists, volunteers, and every time it was like going from one doctor to another, and the new doctor saying that the previous doctor has diagnosed the problem wrong. And I'm not joking. This might sound, it is very painful. So I think as a civil society organization member, I think technologists should actually take a step back, right? I understand you think you're artists. I understand that your choice of tech. No, I'm not trying to be funny. This is not landing well. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there is deep attachment to their choice of technology. There's a deep conviction that what they're saying is correct. There's a deep belief that only that a piece of code can solve the problem. And we found it very, very difficult. At least I have not seen it, and maybe the others have. I have not seen a lot of technologists wanting to do simple contributions, wanting to take simple existing tools and just help a not-for-profit, right? It always gets into a deep level of intellectualization, which is so abstract after a point that I just feel bad that I didn't do engineering in college, right? So I don't think technologists are open to the idea of open source, right? We found some of them and we got very lucky, and I think that education should happen even on the other side, that here are grassroots organization They really want to be in service of the people they are working in. They operate with a lot of constraints. They don't interact with technology like you do every day. They don't want to be in like this cutting edge technology stuff. Like now the pressure we have is how to integrate ChatGPT, right? So I think there should be that education done as well, or else I think this is a misconception that technologists want to do open source contribution. FOSS is an exception to the case, but in general, I'm saying that.
Okay.
So here's another disagreement that we'll take offline. But I think, so to a large extent, actually, I do agree with Kuldeep, and I'm glad that I'm the last doctor that he's seen, because I don't think he's gone shopping around for more doctors. From a tech perspective, so I'm glad he's found peace at last. But
That sounds a little. Found peace.
again,
The patient has been cured.
from a very tech perspective. But I think the situation in India is changing. And just this Monday, right? I don't know how many of you know about it. And there's actually someone here from Samagra who ran this really amazing program, at least from my perspective, called Code for GovTech. And they recruited 100 plus students from across India who were really, really good at open source, really smart engineers, to contribute back to many open source projects across India. I think ReBenefit was also one of the projects out there, right? So I think we are building this new generation of people coming into the sector who really are understanding and are familiar with open source. So I do agree that many of the engineers today in the Indian engineering ecosystem aren't as savvy with open source, don't use open source as their bread and butter on an everyday basis, but we are seeing more and more progress on that from the younger generation. And yeah, and again, like contributions to open source projects, whether people know about it or not, is always a hard problem, right? Whether it's in India, whether it's in the US or in Europe, right? Getting contributors is a super, like, it's a long journey, and you've got to kind of stick to it.
Yeah. And Kuldeep, I wanted to bring out another point, and we have another just 5 minutes to close this panel. But, you mentioned that while Samaja was built very much for benefits purpose, once it was around, there were actually other organizations and governments that wanted to use it, and sort of what that journey has been for you.
Yeah, so actually, just very, very quickly, like we didn't want to build, we didn't know of open source, and we knew it, but we didn't know that we could build it. So I think when we started engaging with the FOSS universe, I think there was a part of their design or experiment wherein they pushed us to kind of think of a little bit more of a generic use case rather than ReBenefit, and we could see that in the conversations. And I remember like reaching out to Lobo, and Lobo being Lobo, he said, this is a complete ReBenefit use case. Can this happen on the ground? And it was a great provocation, and it was a great challenge. So in the last 6 months, we have not sold it. Like we have not said, hey, you use this tool. Like we have experimented this with 2 governments, Delhi, little bit, Assam, and Punjab, and there is a lot of openness. But the problem we are facing with open source, and this is on a lighter note, that it sounds so simple that governments think there is something wrong with this, right? It's not like, it doesn't sound very complicated. So we have seen that governments are willing to adopt it because it's almost like a plug and play. You can do it in 2 to 3 hours. So the risk of experimenting is low. The risk of trying something new is much low. So that's one thing we have seen. The second use case we have seen is like a lot of not-for-profits have reached out, but again, we have picked this learning from Lobo, as in just telling them here is a tool will not help. So like one team member is always spending time in getting them to, almost install this thing once and help them customize it, because we are not tech vendors and we don't want to build tech for others, right? So we kind of built a small ecosystem of 4 or 5 freelancers. There's already one, we learned from ERP Next, already like a 3-4 member organization which is only looking at helping in Frappe. And once we understand the use case, help build a certain prototype, then the ecosystem takes over. The last thing what we are now doing is how can we have like the community contribute? So because we work with a lot of young people, can young people start taking use cases and start contributing? And we are seeing that. So to answer your question, yes, there is openness. Yes, they are trying. Yes, they're trying it for some time, but I don't know how long will they try it for. So 3 parts of this puzzle we have cracked, but now is the sustenance, like 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. We don't know that because it's just been 4 months. So the jury's out on that.
Not yet out.
Not yet.
So we're about to close, but maybe each one of you can just take a minute to summarize what do you think is the biggest potential of you leveraging open source for citizen sector, also the biggest barriers, and sort of in what directions should organization look if they want to successfully use technology in the next decade? Maybe 5 years. Decade might be too long for tech.
So I would say open source is the new normal. If you're not using open source, then you have to really rethink your technology models, etc. Having said that, I think there is a lot that we in the industry need to do to make open source more easily consumable by non-profits. I used to work at Red Hat, and one of the big successes of Red Hat was that they very clearly said that our role is to make open source consumable by the enterprise. So now when we talk about the non-profit sector, I think the FOSS industry, FOSS businesses have to step up and make it easily consumable by the non-profit so that they don't have, I mean, non-profits anyway are, underfunded, dealing with, on-the-ground challenges. So if we can make the life of the non-profit founders and non-profit organizations easier, I think we have done a good job as the IT industry, as the FOSS community.
Thank you, Venki.
So I won't answer that question exactly, but I'll kind of talk more to the NGOs in the room, right? So from an NGO perspective, I would say, like, don't worry about open source. Like, don't worry about technology. Think about what your problem is and think about what you think some of the solutions are. And then talk to your peers, talk to your networks, right? Talk to the FOSS United community, and then figure out what the best solution for your specific problem is. And if it's not open source, it's okay. I know this is a FOSS conference and everything, but ultimately, what's important is for your problem to be solved in as, I won't say cheap is too strong a word, but in as affordable a manner as possible. And so solve the problem first. And if open source is a solution, great. If it's not a solution, it's not a big deal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Lobo on that, right? Like focusing. We agree.
Deepa's getting cold feet because this session about to get over.
No, I think I agree with Lobo. Like the focus, like for us as not-for-profits, the focus is and should be on the stakeholder we are in service of. So clearly, and like we are not a bunch of techies. So I'm pretty convinced that like even a non-tech organization can build a tech tool or can use tech tools which are there. What I have learned is it's not about the technology, it's about the thinking behind technology, right? So I think we'll need to have more openness to be in this open source world, like as not-for-profits in looking for these low-code, no-code tools. But the vantage point I am working with, I feel that in the next 3-4 years, another opportunity will come that the tools we build, the stakeholders we are engaging with will start contributing to it. I think like there is going to be I'm convinced that there'll be something more bottom up coming, right? So imagine the student you're teaching says that, maybe I'm using code as a very loose word here, but you can do this, or your engagement can improve. Or if you're in Assam, try these techniques. So because technology is becoming so low code, no code, it's almost democratic to a point wherein I can go spend 4 or 5 hours and learn something. So the possibility I am seeing is where we all will probably go is that, of course, we'll talk to our peer, and there is one is the NGO community, but we are still bound by our organization, our mission, our funding, which is very, very important. I'm not saying it's not important, but I think the future is going to be that the stakeholder will start contributing. So you don't even have to take projects to young people. Young people will say, I see this problem, I think tech can solve for it, and this is my contribution. And I think there's a huge opportunity to unlock there, wherein your stakeholder is your contributor. And that would be my urge to people. Like, there's a huge opportunity to look at bottom up. Like, there is a lot of focus on GovTech, but there's also a huge opportunity in like citizen tech. So almost every stakeholder becomes a contributor. Imagining that world will be very, very good. So I see us reaching that point in the next 3 to 5 years.
Wow, thank you. With that beautiful vision, we can close this panel and thank our amazing panelists today.